Hello Flight Simmers and welcome back to Alpha Hotel Flight Simulator Training. In this video we're going to take a quick look at using the OBS mode on a GPS. This is a topic that I'd planned to cover in my tutorial on the G1000 GPS, but I forgot to include it, so I've made this quick tutorial to cover the topic. So what is OBS mode? OBS mode is a mode that can be used on some GPS receivers that allows you to utilize any navigable point in the GPS database like a VOR. OBS stands for Omni Bearing Selector. This is the knob that allows you to select a course when using a VOR radio. On the G1000, it's a small inner triangular knob located to the right side of the PFD and MFD. Normally, when you have the CDI set to display GPS information, the system will automatically set the CDI course for you based on the desired track for the current segment you're flying. OBS mode will do three things for you. First, it will allow you to select a course when in GPS mode rather than the GPS automatically setting the course for you. Second, and most importantly, it will allow you to utilize the waypoint you're currently navigating to like a VOR. You can dial in a specific bearing that you'd like to navigate to or from that point on, and then track it like a VOR radial inbound or outbound from that point. On the G1000, it will also display the course you've selected to or from that point on the moving map. Finally, it will suspend automatic waypoint sequencing. This means that when you pass over the point you were navigating off of before you enter the OBS mode, it will not automatically sequence to the next waypoint in your flight plan. This allows you to track outbound from that point if you desire, but if you want to go back to navigating on your original flight plan and let the unit sequence to the next waypoint, you need to disengage OBS mode. OBS mode currently only works on the G1000 and Microsoft Flight Simulator. There is an OBS button on the Garmin 530, but it doesn't function. If you're a PC user, you can get a mod that makes it work on the 530, though the interface is still a little cumbersome even with this mod. Not to say that this is a bad mod, far from it. It adds quite a few very helpful features and functions to both the 530 and the 430, and I highly recommend getting it if you like flying aircraft that have these units. If you're interested, I'll leave a link to that mod in the video description. There's also an OBS soft key on the G3000 panel, which is in the TBM 930, but it does not appear to function at this time. As far as I know, no other GPS in-flight sim has an OBS mode, functional or otherwise, but if you found that not to be true, please let me know in the comments. I'll mention that I'll be using the G1000 NXI to do this demonstration, since that's going to be the default G1000 panel for Microsoft Flight Simulator as of Sim Update 10, which, last I heard, is due out in late August of 2022. But the OBS mode does work on the old G1000 panel, and it works pretty much the same in both units. I'll also mention that it's very helpful to know how to use a VOR and how to navigate using bearings to use the OBS mode on a GPS. If you're not familiar with those topics and you want to study up on them, I'll leave a link to my videos on those subjects in this video's description. To demonstrate how to use the OBS mode, we'll fly a flight using the same route I've used for a few other GPS training videos. From Tell City, Indiana in southern Indiana, identifier on that airport is Kilo Tango Echo Lima, to Bardstown, Kentucky, just to the south of Louisville, which is Kilo Bravo Romeo Yankee. Normally, the route we use for this flight is Tell City, direct to the cargo waypoint, direct to Elizabethtown Airport, which is Kilo Echo Kilo X-Ray, direct to New Hope VOR, which is Echo Whiskey Oscar, then direct to the Bardstown Airport. But today we'll say that there is an area of weather over the cargo waypoint that we want to avoid. So we'll remove cargo from the flight plan, and we'll plan to take off from Tell City and head due south. We'll then use the OBS mode to intercept and track the 270 bearing from Elizabethtown Airport to stay well clear of our imaginary storms. We'll then fly to Elizabethtown on that bearing, and as we pass over Elizabethtown, we'll disengage the OBS mode and resume navigating on our original flight plan. All right, to set up for the flight, I've got the Cessna 172, the G1000 edition. I went ahead and gave it full tanks of fuel. And then for the departure airport, I'm going to use Kilo Tango Echo Lima. That is Perry County Municipal in Tell City. I'm going to launch off of runway 13. I'll go ahead and start on the runway. I am not going to enter my flight information in the flight simulator flight planner. I will do that manually in the NXI. I think with the NXI, with its interface, it's more efficient to do it that way. But if you wanted to enter it here, you could. I would recommend using the IFR low and route option. That will still give you a direct routing, and then you can add in the fixes if you want to do that. And of course, you could also use a third party like Little Nav Map. As far as the flight conditions, you can do whatever you want there. I'm going to set it up for VFR with calm winds, and I'll set it up probably. I've been running April as the date, mid-April. That seems to cut down on the turbulence and doing it fairly early in the morning, say 8 or 9 o'clock or something like that. So once you have all that set up how you like it, then it's time to go ahead and go fly. All right, so I am on the runway 13 at Tell City. I went ahead and loaded up my flight plan. So there is Tell City, direct to Elizabethtown Airport, direct to New Hope VOR, and then direct to destination of Bardstown, Kentucky. And we can see that that is accurate and that is in the map. And currently my active leg is to the Elizabethtown Airport. So what I'll do is I'll take off of runway 13 here in Tell City, and then I'm going to head due south, and then I will activate the OBS mode, and I will dial in a 270 degree bearing from or a 090 degree bearing to the Elizabethtown Airport, and I'll intercept and track that bearing using the OBS mode, which will keep us south of the weather that we're pretending is up here around the cargo intersection in this VOR up here. So everything looks like it is ready to go, so we will go ahead and take off and head south. All right, so I took off out of Tell City and I headed due south. I put it into heading mode, currently in heading hold mode on the autopilot, and heading about 180 heading, and I've leveled at the cruise altitude of 5,500 feet. You can see that the flight plan is still in there, and I'm just flying manually in heading mode to avoid the weather over here. So we'll put it into OBS mode here in just a second. Right now, again, the course on the CDI is controlled by the GPS. It's saying you need to fly a desired track of 123 to get between Tell City and Elizabethtown right now. And if I move the course knob, it doesn't do anything at all. So I want to intercept and track the 270 degree bearing from Elizabethtown Airport. We could also think of that as the 270 degree radial from that point if it were a VOR. So what I want to do is, if I want to track inbound on the 270 degree radial, if I'm heading towards the station and I'm located west of the station, then to go towards the station I need to go east. So I need to dial in 090 degrees on if this was a VOR to track inbound from the west. So that's what I'll do. I'll put it into OBS mode, and you can see it tells me I am now in OBS mode. The green OBS soft key is now highlighted. This is in the main soft key menu, by the way. You don't have to go down any further levels to get to this. And then I will turn it to the left to a 090, and you can see as I do this, it moves the little indication on the map here. My magenta line moves as I move the CDI to show me where that bearing is going to be. So if I move it to 090, again, we're in an area of country where magnetic variation is so that east is not due east. True east and magnetic east are slightly different. And so this tells me that I am about 4 miles north of that selected bearing. And in about 3¼ miles, I will intercept that bearing, and then I can put in a heading to intercept that. I can go ahead and arm the nav mode, and then it will intercept and track it. In fact, I'm close enough now. I'll go ahead and put about a 30-degree intercept in here, and that'll point me towards that radial and give me a little shallower of an intercept. And on the NXI, I can go ahead and arm the nav mode, and it will tell me that the GPS is armed, and once this course comes into the center, it will go ahead and turn to, and it will track that bearing that I have selected in the OBS mode. So that's essentially how the OBS mode works. You are just turning whatever point you're navigating to. It has to be the point that you're going to next in the flight plan. if I wanted to go to New Hope VOR and do this off of New Hope VOR, I would either need to go direct to New Hope VOR, or I'd have to delete Elizabethtown Airport. So it does have to be your active waypoint to use the OBS mode off of. But once you've got that all set up, it works just like a VOR radio, and it basically turns any point that you can put in the GPS and navigate to in the GPS. It basically turns it into a VOR radio, and you just use it exactly like a VOR radio. This works on airports. It works on like your waypoints and fixes that are out there. You can use it on a VOR radio, although I don't know why you'd want to do that if you can actually use the VOR radio. But you can use it on any point you can load into the GPS. You can use the OBS mode in. And you can see we're now within 2 miles of the course, so the distance at the bottom, the cross-track error has gone away. Terminal sensitivity means that when the CDI is at the wall, that you're 2 or more miles away, and once you're inside of that, it takes that cross-track error away. So now we just wait for it to center up, and again, the GPS is armed on the autopilot, so once it centers up, the autopilot will automatically turn and start tracking that 090 bearing to Elizabethtown, or the 270 degree bearing from, or radial from, if you want to think of it that way. And we can see the GPS has come alive. It's making a little turn to the right here. It doesn't like my intercept, I guess. And then it starts to turn to the left again to track that course. And so now it's making that turn back, and it's just going to track this bearing to the station, or bearing from the station, just like it would track a VOR radio or a normal GPS course. And again, it's not going to sequence. You can see the flight plan is in here. You can see the white line that shows Tell City down to Elizabethtown, and then down to New Hope, and then up to Bardstown. So the flight plan is still in there. So once I get to Elizabethtown, and if I want to resume the rest of the flight plan, then I need to go ahead and disengage the OBS mode, and it will just pick up the flight plan wherever it is at that point, and start navigating off the flight plan, and then it'll start sequencing. The next active waypoint will become New Hope, and then after it passes New Hope, it'll become Bardstown. So it'll start automatically sequencing again. And one more thing I'll point out about OBS mode is that when you go into OBS mode, instead of having a fix and a fix up here, you do have the OBS up here to tell you that it's an OBS mode. So that displays up here as well as down on the CDI. And then you'll see right now it's saying that we're going to EKX. And you'll see that once we fly over EKX, it won't, normally if you weren't in OBS mode, it would start to sequence down the rest of the list of fixes that you have in your flight plan. So it would go from EKX to New Hope, EWO, and on to Bardstown. But if we keep it in OBS mode, it won't do that. We need to take it out of OBS mode for it to go back to resequencing normally. So we'll give a demo of that as we pass over the airport here. So you can see as we approach that point, the distance counts down, and then it will start to count back up, and you'll also get the flip of the to from flag, just like you would on a VOR. And it now we're tracking outbound on this bearing, on the 090 bearing from New Hope VOR, or excuse me, from Elizabethtown VOR. And again, it hasn't resumed normal waypoint sequencing. So that's a demonstration of kind of what happens there. So I'll go ahead and put it back into heading mode, and to get it out of OBS mode, I will go ahead and hit the OBS soft key. You can see it goes briefly back into suspend, and then it automatically dials the desired track for our next waypoint, and you can see the next waypoint is turned magenta. We're now going to New Hope, and our last waypoint, or our last leg, is now available. It's in solid white instead of being kind of a thin white line there. So I'll go ahead and put in a intercept heading here, about 10 or 20 degrees, to get it back on the original flight plan route there. And I can go ahead and nav up the autopilot here, and it will arm that in GPS mode, so that once it centers back up there, we'll be back on course with the original flight plan, and we'll automatically be tracking that. So that is how OBS works and how you can use it when you're using a flight plan. You can use it also if you're going direct to someplace. You can also use that point as a VOR as well. That's how the OBS mode works. So let's talk about one more trick you can use with the OBS mode. Another handy technique you can use the OBS mode for is giving yourself some navigational guidance to line up with a runway at an airport. To do this, you want to make sure that the airport you want to land at is the active waypoint in the GPS. Again, we can only use OBS mode off of the active waypoint that we're currently navigating to. So take a look at that top nav data box and make sure that the airport code is in the right-hand side, and that's the waypoint that you're going to. It should either be the last waypoint in your flight plan if you're planning to land there, and make sure that it's active, or you can go direct to the airport if you just want to go direct. This will also work that way. Once you've done that, you want to engage the OBS mode using the OBS soft key in the middle bottom of the primary flight display. Then use the course selector or the OBS knob to dial in the runway heading for your desired runway. The way you can find precise runway headings is to go to an airport diagram. If you have an airport diagram for that airport, typically these will be available for towered airports in the US. The other way is you can look at a approach plate, particularly if it has a GPS approach to that runway. That's typically going to be the course is going to be lined up with the runway heading, so you can enter that. If it looks like it's a straight in approach, you can enter that heading. Otherwise, you can just set yourself down on the runway, line yourself up with the center line, and see what heading you're on when you do that. Or you can just make a estimate based on the runway designation. For example, if it's runway 18, you know that the runway heading should be roughly 180. It won't be as precise as getting a precise heading off an approach plate or an airport diagram, but it should be close enough to get you to close enough that you can see the runway to land. Once you do this, it's going to display a quote-unquote radial that's lined up with the runway, and you can use that to navigate to the runway. It will appear on the moving map so that you can just steer yourself onto the magenta line, and it will also display on the CDI. So once your CDI is centered up, you know that you are lined up with that runway, and you can even use the autopilot to engage that and track it in nav or GPS tracking mode, and it should take you right to the runway. So let's take a look at how to do this in the sim. And to demonstrate how this works, we're currently past New Hope VOR and headed directly to Bardstown, Kentucky. Our desired track is 042 to get from New Hope over to Bardstown. I actually want to land on runway 3 today, and so I went into the approach plate for the GPS, RNAV GPS to runway 3 into Bardstown, and it looks like the runway heading is 026. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this into heading mode, and so now we are in heading mode. It's going to hold the heading and not try to track the GPS course. You can see it's gone into suspension because it's going to its last waypoint. There's nothing to sequence after this waypoint. So I will hit that, and that will bring up OBS mode as an availability. Then I hit it again to make it green. It goes into OBS mode. It tells me there and there that it's in OBS mode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this left to the track of 026, which is what the runway is aligned with. And if I can navigate myself over there, I'll put myself on a little more, maybe another 10 degrees of an intercept here. And it tells me right now I'm 2.3-ish miles off course from this selected radial. Again, all I've done here is I've turned Bardstown into basically a VOR, and when I set the desired track of 026 in there, that means that that VOR radial is lined up with runway 3 there at Bardstown. So once I'm lined up with this radial, I should be pretty much lined up with the runway. And this can help in conditions of low visibility, or if you're just having difficulty seeing the airport or seeing the runway, it can help you to find that. I'll also go ahead and start a descent here, so we can maybe do a landing at the airport as well. I'll go ahead and arm the nav function up as well, so if I get busy doing other things, I won't forget to intercept and track this new bearing that will line me up with the runway here. And it started to go into the process of starting to track this radial. It makes a little bit bigger cut intercept, but this gives you a good visual picture of what this will do for you. You can see there's the runway over there, and we're coming up on the bearing that we've selected using the OBS mode, and it's going to line us up pretty much straight with the runway here. So once we're lined up with that bearing to the airport, that'll line us up pretty much directly with the runway there. And this is really useful, if either you're having difficulty seeing the runway due to like low visibility, or it's just kind of in an area where it's hard to see it, or if you have low visibility conditions, maybe it's legally VFR, but it's not easy to find the runway. This is a good technique for getting yourself lined up, close enough. It's not exact. It's not like a localizer to where you're going to be dead on the center line. But it is, close enough that it should get you close enough to the runway and lined up with the runway so that you'll be able to see it and land. That concludes this video. Hopefully it's given you a good idea of how to use the OBS mode on the G1000. As you can see, it's a handy feature that gives you some unique tools to use in navigating with this panel. As always, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed the content. And don't forget to ring the notification bell if you'd like to be notified of future content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.